In the previous thoughts of the day, I spoke about how war and famine have been averted through the introduction of covert methods of population control since 1945, but how irreparable damage has been done to human health, fertility, and to our genetic and intellectual endowments. I have also talked about the inevitable tragedy that will follow if our governments and the military-industrial complex were to continue to poison us into oblivion. Today, I will talk about what will happen if nothing were done about population growth from this moment onward. What will happen if covert chemical and biological methods of population control were abandoned overnight, along with psychosocial and economic methods of subverting the family structure, and life were simply allowed to return to normal? Human fertility would return to normal in the developing world almost overnight, certainly within a few short years. Because there the population is less damaged than in the developed world, having been subjected to covert methods of population control for just one generation, as opposed to 3 generations in the developed world. And the total fertility would jump to 6, 7, or 8 children per woman, depending on the country and culture. In the developed world, fertility would stagnate to where it is at circa 1.5 children per woman for about a generation, thus for about 30 years. After which, the reproductive systems would slowly recover and would go back to normal, thus to 6, 7, or 8 children per woman, on average. The result of this would be a doubling of the global population in the next 35 to 40 years, after which the population would double in perpetuity every 20 years. Not only would we probably not survive the first doubling from 7 to 14 billion people, which would happen by the middle of this century, we would certainly not survive the next doubling from 14 to 28 billion, which would happen from the middle of this century to 2070, thus in just 2 decades, which is just a drop in time in historical terms. Even if we were to survive the first doubling from 7 to 14 billion by 2050, the damage done to the planet would be catastrophic, and life on Earth would be a nightmarish scenario. People simply do not understand what a doubling of the global population entails. A population that is already enormous and far above the Earth's carrying capacity and certainly unsustainable. It entails a doubling of the infrastructure, which means either building twice as many cities and roads as we already have, or squeezing twice as many people into the existing cities and roads, which would make them so crowded and noisy and polluted and dirty and chaotic that no one would want to live in them. And these cities would simply drive us all mad. It would also necessitate a doubling of the crop and pasture land, but we already used 30% of the ice-free landmass for this purpose. If we were to double the land we use for agriculture and for animal rearing, we would have to take up 60% of the world's ice-free landmass, and that would leave no room whatsoever for the other species, which means that we will have to destroy almost all life on Earth, along with the planet's life support systems, just to feed ourselves. Alternatively, we would have to grow twice as much food on the existing land, which means that we would have to use agricultural methods that are even more artificial and damaging and devastating than the ones we now use, and that already ruin the soil and the water. Let's say that we could survive the next doubling from 7 to 14 billion, and we could double the arable land from 30% to 60%, and we could live on a denuded planet alone, having killed most of the other animal and plant species. What would be gained by having twice as many people on this planet. What would be gained? Absolutely nothing. But what will be lost is absolutely everything, from biodiversity to quality of life. And once there are 14 billion people on the planet and all other life forms are dead and the planet turned into 20 or 30 monocrops, we would still face a doubling of the population from 14 to 28 billion in just 20 years' time, this time, because the reproductive systems of the people in the developed world will have recovered. So from 2050 to 2070, in just 2 short decades, we would have to double the arable land from 60% to 120% of the existing ice-free landmass. And we would have to double the number or size or density of our cities. In other words, we would have to double everything, from cars to planes to schools to homes to roads to hospitals. No miracle can make that happen. The only escape we have is to pass a global replacement level fertility law and to enforce it for dear life at any and all costs. The Chinese have already listened to my advice and have implemented a 2-children policy. The rest of the world must follow suit, or else we only have 2 to 3 short decades left on this planet, because in this time we will have destroyed everything on it. It is now or never.